The Bloods are a group that have intrigued and horrified Americans from the dark alleys of Los Angeles to the nooks and crannies of New York City. Some of its members have gained notoriety for their cruelty thanks to the group's crazy, influential past and undying loyalty. After all, many famous rappers have affiliations with the gang. The Bloods were a formidable African-American street gang that formed in the heart of Los Angeles, California. Their heated rivalry with another gang called the Crips made them instantly recognizable by their signature red clothing and unique hand signs. The conflict between the two groups started in the late 1960s, when members of the Crips gang attacked two high school students, Sylvester Scott and Benson Owens. Owens responded by forming the West Piru gang, while Scott founded the original Bloods group, also known as Piru. Their primary objective was self-defense against the Crips, a gang whose name struck fear in the hearts of many locals. The tragic events of March 21, 1972 only served to escalate the situation. The Crips brutally beat and put an end to Robert Ballo Jr. during a Wilson Pickett and Curtis Mayfield concert because he wouldn't give up his leather jacket. The media began paying attention to the Crips after the crime, and word of the gang's dangerous reputation quickly spread. As the Crips became more brazen and violent, rival gangs began to feel trapped. Conflicts broke out with rival gangs such as Piru's and Black P. Stones and Athens Park Boys. However, a change occurred in the air. On June 5, 1972, West Side Crip Frederick Little Country Garrett became the gang's first member to meet his demise. Because of this, the non-Crips gang finally banded together. On August 4, 1972, in response, the Brims used violence, resulting in the demise of Thomas Ellis, a founding member of the West Side Crips. The situation reached a boiling point pitch by the end of 1972. As Crip pressure mounted, the Pirus decided to hold a meeting. A new alliance, the Bloods, was formed by gangs that felt threatened by the Crips. The Bloods can trace their origins back to the Pirus, who sparked this formidable alliance. The Bloods had grown to include 15 subsets by 1978, although they were still outnumbered by the Crips by a factor of 3. The Bloods, desperate to prove their superiority, ramped up the violence. Then in the 1980s, they saw an opening in the Los Angeles crack cocaine market. The number of Bloods and their influence spread rapidly across the country. It wasn't just ambition that drove this expansion. The massive revenues from crack cocaine trafficking were a major factor. The earnings were so high that people started setting up shop in other towns and states, allowing the group to grow even larger. Now, let us take a quick look at some of their most prominent members. Poochie. Although few people knew his name, Wardell Faust had a mysterious presence on Compton streets. Darnell Bolton, also known as Poochie, was an incendiary member of the Blood Street Gang and a member of the mob Pirus. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky, but after moving to Compton, he quickly became known simply as Poochie. In this underworld of back alleyways and secret handshakes, he also met Suge Knight, another affiliate of the Bloods, and the two rapidly became inseparable. Poochie's existence was a turbulent tapestry of violence and anguish. When he was only 14 years old, he lost a fist fight and, with anger, opened fire on his enemy's home with a shotgun. According to his admission, he pulled the trigger. Over the years, the term Poochie became invariably linked to criminal activity. In 1991, he was suspected of being involved in a house invasion that ended fatally for one guy and critically for his girlfriend. He was apprehended in 1994 by Reggie Wright Jr., who eventually became the head of security at Death Row Records with a pound of cocaine and an assault rifle. Yet, Poochie's name will remain notorious for being linked to the death of a rap legend, the Notorious B.I.G. After he started working as a bodyguard for Death Row Records, the label's CEO, Suge Knight, gave him a brand new Chevy Impala. The Impala would come to represent the tragedy of that evening. It was almost midnight on March 9, 1997. Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious B.I.G., was leaving an overcrowded after-party when the fire alarms went off. The LA Knight waited with anticipation as Wallace sat in his SUV, his friend Puffy in the lead vehicle. The time was 12:45 a.m. as Wallace's SUV pulled up at a traffic signal in Wilshire Boulevard. There was a dark Chevrolet Impala SS parked just next to Wallace's SUV. The world stopped moving as a black man opened fire on Wallace's car with a 9mm pistol. 4 gunshots hit the notorious B.I.G. and he was admitted to Cedars-Sinai Hospital. The coroner confirmed his death at 1:15 a.m. However, as fate continued to grind, Poochie met his own demise on July 24, 2003, just 2 days after his 43rd birthday. A fellow gang member named Lil Rod ambushed him as he rode his motorcycle through Compton and shot him 10 times in the back. OG Mac. There aren't many New York street names that carry the same unsettling resonance as Omar Porti. His life story, which began when he was only 17 and took on the name OG Mac, which is tangled in the webs of criminality, political ambition, and betrayal. In the early hours of August 16, 1987, Lil Porti witnessed the savage demise of Terrence Joyner in the Bronx, changing the course of his life forever. Thanks to the testimony provided by Porti, Don Taylor, the alleged shooter, was given a lengthy prison term. However, this testimony was not given out of honesty. Porti made a deal with prosecutors that reduced his potential sentence of up to 50 years in jail to just 2 to 6 years in exchange for his cooperation. Although his time in jail would be short, it would lay the scenario for a spectacular release. Porti's recantation of his evidence led to Taylor's release in 2004. He had been released on bail on June 20, 1990. However, this was only a small part of the overall narrative. In 1992, Porti was arrested again and returned to Rikers Island, this time facing up to 5 years in jail for criminal possession of a weapon. Here, he would cross paths with Leonard OG Deadeye McKenzie, with whom he would later develop a strategy for commanding authority. The United Blood Nation was founded in 1993 by inmates of Rikers Island, a harsh setting from which the gang's poisonous roots eventually extended to New York City. Porti's rule within the prison was inspiring and horrifying in equal measure. 3 members of the rival Latin Kings gang were permanently scarred by a shiv he fashioned from a Scrabble tile and used in an attack that he led. For OG Mac, however, incarceration served only as a temporary dungeon. After his release on June 22, 1999, he returned to the streets with a renewed commitment to expanding the Blood's power. Porti's rule spanned the Bronx, and he commanded a hidden empire of drugs, prostitution, and thievery by dividing the gang into subgroups, such as 1-8 Trey and the Sex Money Murder. He waged a war on rival drug dealers by enlisting young warriors, some of whom were under 16. His businesses on 183rd Street and Davidson Avenue did well, but he knew that power like this would eventually be challenged. Porti was found guilty of numerous offenses, including murder and credit card fraud, on August 27, 2002. On April 14, 2003, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison by federal court judge Naomi Reese Bushwald. Regis Dion Thomas. Thomas grew up in the harsh South Central LA communities and was familiar with crime and strife. He joined the notorious bounty hunter Blood Gang and was the oldest of the 4 children born on June 16, 1970. Thomas's life was a patchwork of instability and disobedience, and he has a criminal record that includes a conviction for lying from 1990. His brief stint as a security guard at an alcohol store provided some steadiness, but even that was destroyed when the store was torched in the Los Angeles riots of 1992. Thomas was suddenly unemployed and his life was falling apart. On January 31, 1992, Carlos Adkins was brutally ended in his apartment in Torrance, serving as a sign of more danger to come. The shots fired by Thomas would forever linger in his mind. On the chilly night of February 22, 1993, a little over a year later, Thomas's fate became inexorably intertwined with those of 2 Compton police officers. Thomas was pulled over in his red 1992 Chevrolet pickup truck by 2 police officers, Kevin Michael Burrell, 29 years old, and James Wayne McDonald, 24 years old, who were out on a normal patrol. Rosecrans Avenue and Dwight Street merged to form a hazardous crossroad. Thomas leaped from the truck as the police officers approached, firing a barrage of shots at them. Thomas's anger was too much for the 2 police officers, and their bulletproof jackets did not save them. He opened fire on their heads in an execution-style attack, leaving behind 9 empty shells as silent witnesses to the atrocity. Both officers were unable to draw their weapons or contact dispatch in time. They had been shot and were discovered lying on their backs by Thomas. Their deaths, the department's 2nd and 3rd in its entire history, devastated the city of Compton. McDonald's death during his final shift as a volunteer reserve officer made his death all the more tragic. These deaths sparked a huge manhunt, which led to the resolution of 3 other homicides and 2 attempted homicides. Thomas was apprehended on April 6, 1993, when he unexpectedly gave himself up to KTLA News anchor Warren Wilson. Compton police officers Timothy M. Brennan and Robert Ladd, among others, were part of a task force searching for him. The trial of Thomas summed up his violent life. On August 15, 1995, after being found guilty, he was given a death sentence. His life's work is currently contained within San Quentin State Prison, where he is on death row awaiting execution. Suge Knight. Marion Hugh Knight Jr., better known as Suge Knight, is a name commonly associated with the development of hip-hop, the success of businesses, and a complex personal life. He was a towering figurehead behind the famed Death Row Records, but his ties to the Bloods gang were a defining feature of his multifaceted identity. Suge was raised in a world where the Bloods and the Crips were more than just words. They were a reality that shaped the lives of people all around them. He was born in Compton, California, a place infamous for gangs. Knight, who towered over his opponents at 6 feet and 2 inches, also played in the National Football League for a while. His real success, though, would come in the music business. There are many facets to the story of how Suge Knight became involved with the Bloods. One could see this as a reflection of Compton's cultural heritage and the factors that have influenced his character. His frequent use of the Blood's signature color, red, in his wardrobe led some to conclude that he was a member of the gang. This link, however, had more significance than met the eye. More than just an allegiance, Suge Knight's involvement with the Bloods was a calculated move on his part. Knight recruited heavily from the Bloods for the security team at Death Row Records. This was a strategic business move that reflected both his connections and his commercial acumen. This group's ability to inspire devotion and fear helped it maintain power and influence in a highly competitive business. This fusion of corporate success and gang culture became a symbol of Death Row Records' rise to fame in the 90s. Famous musicians including Tupac Shakur, Dr. Dre, and Snoop Dogg were signed by the company. Nonetheless, Knight's history with gangs was a threatening cloud. It gave off a more genuine and menacing vibe, which might work either for or against you. However, the story of Knight's rise to power and influence is tarnished by violence and court fights, as are so many others. His tie to the Bloods, which were not only symbolic, were linked to a number of illegal endeavors. Knight's name remained in the news for all the wrong reasons, with accusations of strong-arm tactics, intimidation, and even a possible connection to the death of Notorious B.I.G. Knight's dramatic fall from music entrepreneur to incarcerated felon reflects how his ties to the Bloods, which had once brought him success, ultimately led to his demise. His days of chart-topping fame were replaced by arrests, lawsuits, and a 28-year jail sentence for voluntary manslaughter during a hit-and-run accident.